If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined by Bob Phelan. Our co-host Nick Stevens is off for this episode. We hope to have him back later this week as the Orioles begin their run in the MLB postseason. The Orioles will kick off their playoff slate on Tuesday afternoon when they host the Kansas City Royals at Oriole Park at Camden Yards for Game 1 of the best-of-3 wildcard series. Bob and I will break that down on tonight's episode, but first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino to get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today, get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. As we like to do at the top of every episode, we want to welcome a new member of our Patreon community, and with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, we got a new AA member, and I'm going to pronounce your last name like Eric Gagne, Cassidy Chisanye. I don't know if that's how you pronounce the last name, but it's baseball related, so I'll go with it. Thank you, Cassidy, for signing up. Hope you enjoy the content.
And as a reminder, you can become a paying member of our Patreon community for as little as $3 a month. Bob, Nick, and I will be bringing you bonus coverage throughout the offseason. Of course, though, we can't get to the offseason without the playoffs, which is what the Orioles will be faced with starting on Tuesday afternoon. Now, the Orioles, after kind of a rough and tumble second half, did end the season on a high note, winning 5 out of 6 in their final week of the season, giving them a record of 91-71 on the year. Good for the first wild card spot out of the American League and 3 games behind the AL East leading Yankees. Now, in the postseason, the Orioles will face off against the Kansas City Royals team that finished 86-76 this season, and we will break down the Orioles, the Royals, how they match up, who we think is going to win, all of that on this episode. But I just want to start with this question, Bob. Do you feel better about the Orioles than you did a week ago?
I know I shouldn't be this reactionary, but yeah, I do. I feel better about the team. Just feel like I was already feeling better just having, at the end of last weekend, getting Westberg back, Arias back, Mountcastle even came back on the Sunday game last week, and then just having them back for a full week and performing, feels a lot better, more optimistic, I would say. I feel like before this week, I was like, all right, just get in, anything can happen. Now I'm like back into that first half mentality where it's like, I don't see why this couldn't be our playoffs to lose. So, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good despite not getting Grayson Rodriguez back, but I think the offense, and we have enough pitching upside, especially in the bullpen, might not results-wise be there, but hopefully the stuff wins out. And, I feel pretty good going into tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon.
Well, and the Orioles over the final week of the season took 2 out of 3 from the Yankees, and they delayed the Yankees, what had become by that point an inevitable clinch of the AL East, by winning the first 2 games. And the Twins were a pretty beleaguered team at this point in the season. They at one point looked like they were going to be in the playoffs, but really did not play good baseball over the month of September. Yet the Orioles looked pretty promising even with that aside, because Sunday's finale kind of had the formula that we saw a lot from the Orioles last year. We've been lamenting we haven't seen much of this year, which is overcome an early deficit. The bats beat up the Twins bullpen, and the Orioles bullpen does a good job of keeping the game intact. And I want to start with the bullpen because it seems like for the last 2 months now, we've kind of had to look to different places of the roster being the main point of concern. For a while, it was the starting rotation because of all the injuries. Then it was the lineup because of all the injuries. Now the starting rotation has gotten to a point where it seems at least stable. The lineup is getting some guys back. And the bullpen hasn't necessarily been bad lately. And in fact, they had a couple of good games in New York before melting down in the finale. But you're in a spot where you have Jacob Webb and Danny Colomb fresh off the IL. You still have to see what they can contribute in a big moment. And you're going to have to rely heavily on guys like Gregory Soto, Yennier Cano, and Sir Anthony Dominguez. Bob, how are you feeling about this group?
Yeah, it's like I was saying, like these pitchers have the stuff to turn it on like the Rangers bullpen did last year and just be shut down for the next month because you got guys with great stuff like Dominguez, Cano, Colomb, Webb, Soto, even Aiken and Ciona Perez, Colin Selby if he makes the roster, great stuff. So obviously we'll see what happens because, the command hasn't always been there for some of these guys, or there's some other issues like the long ball for Dominguez. But, obviously I would feel much more comfortable if it was Felix Bautista coming in a close game late in the playoffs. But that's not happening, except maybe the World Series, holding out a sliver of hope for that. But, yeah, I'm not going to feel confident going into any close innings, but I'm going to feel like I'm not going to feel like, oh, we're blowing this either. I think it's going to be like wait and see type approach, and at least Craig Kimbrell won't be there to have us biting our nails off.
Well, that's true, and that's certainly a bit of relief for me at least. I think the way that I'm looking at the bullpen right now is that I don't know that I see it being capable of a deep playoff run, but do I think that the Orioles can get through a short series with it? Yes, I do, because the way things are lined up, we know Corbin Burns is starting game 1. As of this recording, the Orioles game 2 starter has not been announced, but it's lining up that it's probably going to be Zach Eflin. And in Burns and Eflin, you have pitchers that can pitch into the 6th inning, even beyond, on a good day. So I have enough trust in this bullpen to get the last 6 to 9 outs of a game.
Yeah, but we know it's going to be stressful because we know Brandon Hyde is going to play the lefty-righty matchups. He'll bring in Perez for 2 batters after Webb got the first 2 righty or 3 batters out, and it'll be a lot of pitching changes and hope everybody's on their A game. So yeah, it'll be stressful, but I do think we have enough, especially against the Royals, and maybe even a 3 out of 5 series coming up against the Yankees potentially. I feel decent about that, but like you said, yeah, it starts to get questionable in those 7-game series how they'll hold up.
And let's just look overall right now. What do you think are the Orioles' strengths and weaknesses? Because as I mentioned, like the weak point of the team has kind of been a moving target for the last couple of months. But they did look a lot more cohesive over the final week of the season. So taking into everything we've seen lately, what do you think are the strong points for the Orioles, and where do you think they are possibly vulnerable?
I think the lineup is now a strong point again, getting these guys back, getting that depth back. And we hit home runs, and it's just the fact that the teams that hit home runs in the playoffs tend to win ball games. And I think we have the potential, if the offense is clicking, to just be like that team that just hits bombs and wins games all October long. I think the starting pitching is a strength, honestly. Burns, Eflin, Kramer, I feel like that's a solid top 3, and then you can either go Albert Suarez or Cade Povich for game 4, depending on the matchups and stuff like that. The bullpen, I do think it's a weakness. I don't think it's like a huge weakness, but there's just no one where it's like 9th inning, oh, we're going to win. This so-and-so is going to close it out. I don't know who they're going to rely on. Sir Anthony Dominguez just, he's got a 3.97 with 10 3.97 ERA with 10 saves since he's come over from the Phillies, but he also has a 5.36 FIP. He gives up a lot of fly balls / home runs. Gregory Soto, I'm almost tempted to use him as the closer because I feel like he's looked sensational since his rough start. He got over that. But yeah, middle innings to seventh, eighth inning, I feel okay. The ninth inning, it's like, let's cross our fingers. But yeah, the lineup, even the depth of the lineup, like we saw Jackson Holiday break out a new toe tap as opposed to the big leg kick over the weekend in Minnesota, and all he did was go 4 for 5 with a double and 3 walks. So that might be working out. If he's going to hit like that, he could be more than just a pinch runner late in games. Heston Kjerstad hit a home run on Sunday, so maybe his bat could help out. Emmanuel Rivera, who knew? 4 for 4 with 2 homers and a double and a walk in Saturday night's game. So, yeah, I just think the offense has the depth and the home run power to really give us a nice month of October here.
Yeah, I kind of see the strength. I actually do think that in this particular series, the starting pitching is a strength because you're going to have Burns and Eflin at the top, and that's an enviable 1-2, even among other playoff teams. And the Royals have a very strong top two, which we'll get to in a little bit. I do think that helps the Orioles. The other thing is that I feel like the lineup is at least now at a point where if one or two guys get hot, that's going to go a long way. And while it's easy to pick Gunnar Henderson as a guy that could be someone to click because he was the team MVP, let's remember that Gunnar was really, really good against the Rangers in that series last year. He was one of the handful of Orioles who really rose to the occasion during that series, 6 for 12 in 3 games with a home run. So if he could bring that back in this series, that's going to be huge for the Orioles. And then I think we've kind of cover it, and I think you hit on a lot of good points with the bullpen, which is just how much do you trust the guys at the back end? Sir Anthony Dominguez does have a very good postseason track record, has a lot of experience with the Phillies, but as you mentioned, his time with the Orioles has been a mixed bag because on one hand, I think he's converted all but one of his save opportunities. The ERA is fine, but gives up a lot of home runs, and the expected numbers are worse than the actual numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, who else has closed games? Yennier Cano, I feel like ever since he had to not go in the IL or anything, but he was unavailable for a few days with the arm soreness, ever since then, I feel like his command has not been up to its normal capabilities. And I still trust him, but I would like to at least see one good dominant outing to really feel comfortable. Colomb, he's just coming off the IL. His velocity's down like a tick or two, but he's like a junk baller, so I'm not sure how much it matters. Keegan Aiken, great season, but not so great in high leverage, so that's, how much can you rely on him? And Cielo Perez really struggled down the stretch. But he doesn't give up home runs, so you're going to need him against lefties. I don't know. At least one positive, I feel like, the last week of the season is Adley Rutschman, who had a terrible second half. I feel like really started to hit the ball really well this last week of the season. It would be huge if he was able to break out of that slump just in time for the playoffs.
Ready to pop the question and take advantage of 30% off? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds. And they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com to get 30% off select lab-grown diamonds. That's BlueNile.com for 30% off lab-grown diamonds. BlueNile.com.
Now let's break down the Royals. For most of the weekend, it looked like it was going to line up that the Orioles would be facing the Detroit Tigers for the third time in a little less than 3 weeks. However, the Royals managed to leapfrog the Tigers on the final day of the season by winning their series finale against Atlanta, while the Tigers dropped their final regular season contest against the Chicago White Sox. For the Royals, as I mentioned earlier, they finished at 86 and 76, but they had kind of a sluggish month of September, going 11 and 14, at one point dropping 7 straight games. Now, they did have a couple of tough opponents in there. They had games against Cleveland, games against the Yankees. They were also swept by a Giants team that gave the Orioles a fit, and they were swept by Detroit. So Kansas City coming into the playoffs a little bit cold, but if you look at the season series between the Orioles and the Royals, those were pretty competitive games. The Orioles took 4 out of 6 with all 6 games being played in April. Of those games, 3 of them were decided by 2 runs or fewer. Overall, the Orioles managed to outscore Kansas City 29-27. And with the Royals, if you're going to look at them as a team, they have Bobby Witt Jr., who is one of the best all-around players in baseball, but otherwise kind of a below-average offense or average offense by most numbers. However, very good pitching staff with Cole Reagans at the top. Seth Lugo, who they brought over this offseason in free agency, gave them a really strong number 2. And they're also a team that runs really well. Not to mention that they're going to possibly have Vinny Pasquantino, one of their better hitters, back for the postseason after an extended IL stint. So, Bob, we had this conversation last week when Connor Newcomb was on. Who do you want to face more, or who would you rather not face, the Tigers and the Royals? And you could go either way at that point, but as the last week played out, did you want to see Detroit or did you want to see Kansas City?
I found myself rooting for Kansas City, and not necessarily just because I think they would be easier to beat, because I think they're pretty similar as far as their strengths and weaknesses. But really, I just want to exercise the demon of 2014. And while it would be crushing to get bounced out of the playoffs by them again this year, it would also feel really good to finally get that playoff win, that series win against a Royals team that was really pesky about 10 years ago. So, yeah, I just think Kansas City, while Bobby Witt, fantastic player, one of the best players in the league, Cole Reagans, Seth Lugo, a great 1-2 in the starting rotation. They just don't scare me at all. Whereas with the Tigers, they scare me a little bit. With Tariq Skubal, I feel like you almost have to count on him beating you game 1 and then rely on winning games 2 and 3, and maybe not necessarily with Corbin Burns being just as good over the last month. But I don't know. I just felt a little bit more comfortable against the Royals. How about you?
As I had said last week, one of the things that concerned me about the Royals, and that still concerns me, is that the Orioles have struggled to control the run game this year, and the Royals are a team that is built to exploit that. So that does put more pressure on the Orioles offense, because you can't afford to have these narrow victories where a stolen base in the top of the 8th or the top of the 9th that brings home the tying run ends up swinging the outcome of the game one way or the other. You don't want to be in that spot, and the Royals can put that kind of pressure on you. But if I'm looking at the roster as a whole, I would rather face Kansas City because Detroit has been playing so well, and the Orioles lost, 2 series against the Tigers this month without ever facing Skubal. And that was in the back of my mind of, what if they had to face Skubal game 1? They haven't seen him this year. The Tigers have taken 2 series from them in basically the last 2 weeks. I don't know how that's going to go. And I think that there is probably not unfamiliarity, but I think that because the Orioles and Royals matchups this season were so long ago, you have to kind of throw them out the window. Even with that, I think that the Orioles are probably going to be in a little bit better spot going up against this group than they would have been against Detroit.
Yeah, I agree. I also think the Royals bullpen is a little bit worse than the Tigers. It's one of their weaknesses, I'd say, the offense outside of Witt and the bullpen. So even if it's like a close game, say Reagans and Burns go beat for beat into the 6th, 7th inning, I feel better, or at least I feel okay, where we can come back and win late in a game against them and hold them down enough. But yeah, especially with Burns on the mound game 1, I'm sure they're going to be running a lot. You have James McCann starting behind the plate tomorrow.
I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I mean, McCann actually did put together a pretty nice month at the plate, not to mention you have in September, that is, McCann put together a nice run at the plate. Not to mention you do have a left-hander on the mound, and that's typically the point where the Orioles are going to put McCann out there. So I would imagine I think you are going to have McCann and Adley in the lineup for game 1. Whether you use McCann behind the plate or Adley back there remains to be seen, but I think McCann has been a little bit better at controlling the run game for the Orioles, so I'm sure that's going to be a consideration.
Yeah, I think McCann will start at catcher, bat ninth. Adley will be DH, batting fifth or something like that. And then once the lefty's out of the game, they can just move Adley behind the plate, lose the DH. I think the bench will be deep enough to just pinch hit for the rest of the game after that, especially because I think they'll only carry like 12 pitchers and they'll have 14 position players. So, yeah, that's the way I see it going down.
Right now, the only pitching matchup we know for sure is Burns and Reagans in game one. And that's really going to be a crucial game because in the best of three, the winner of game one has a lot of momentum on their side. And Burns and Reagans have faced each other twice this season. And if you look at it from the Orioles' perspective, it was a good thing because they won both games, although their performance against Reagans could not have been more opposite in the two contests. The first time they faced the left-hander was on April 3rd at Camden Yards. Reagans went 6 1/3 innings, struck out 7 batters while giving up just 1 hit. The Orioles ended up winning that game, though, on a walk-off. He faced him a few weeks later in Kansas City and lasted just an inning and 2/3 and gave up 7 runs, all of them earned on 9 hits, and the Orioles ended up winning that game 9-7. Given how good Reagans was this year, you can't count on the pitcher you saw in April, the second start, showing up for game one. But knowing that they have faced him, how confident do you feel in the Orioles' chances going up against him?
I feel fine. I don't feel like with Scooble, I feel like, hopefully you scrape a run or two together off of him in 6-7 innings. With Reagans, I mean, it's not dissimilar, but I just feel like I feel more comfortable knowing that the team can put up good at bats against him, get his pitch count up. I feel like with all the struggles, quote unquote struggles in the second half with the offense, they still got their walk percentage up, and I feel like they have done a better job of putting together long at bats, working pitchers in the second half. And I think if you can get him out after the 5th or 6th inning, you're feeling pretty good. And especially with Mountcastle back, Arias back. I know he's a reverse splits guy, but Westberg back. I feel like you feel a lot better. Losing O'Hearn against a lefty, the depth of the lineup is going to help in that regard against a left-handed pitcher. So, and then you have the lefties off the bench; they can come in later. So, yeah, I'm not too worried. And Burns has just pitched so well since September. Sweeper's back. Cutter has improved significantly the last few starts. I'm expecting, and the way that he only threw like 60, 70 pitches in his last outing, I'm fully expecting him to 100-plus pitches, 6-7 innings at least, and shutting down the Royals. I would expect no more than 2 runs to be given up by Burns, if that. I mean, maybe that's optimism, but I just feel like he's peaking at the right moment for the season, and it's almost like it was by design to break the sweeper out late in the game.
Yeah, let's talk about Burns for a minute because the month of August was pretty rough for him, although it seemed like a lot of that owed to the fact that he was having bad luck on balls put in play. You touched on one of the weaknesses that he has, which is really not being able to control the run game, not being able to hold runners. But if he can keep runners off base, which he has done a very good job of down the stretch, that could give the Orioles a big advantage. And a big reason that they're in the position that they're in right now is because of Burns' performance over the month of September. 30 innings pitched between September in the final month of the season, 1.20 ERA, 31 strikeouts against his 8 walks. And I think the strikeout total is really key because the strikeouts had been way down in August. Fan 22 batters and 25 2/3 innings pitched. And that was a trend that had kind of been unfolding for a few months there. Now, part of that is the way that Burns pitches. He likes to get ahead in the count. He likes to be efficient. And he wants to induce weak contact. That has allowed him to be successful for a long time in this game. But it felt like in September he did a better job of striking the balance, and he was able to more successfully put away hitters when he needed to. So do you think he can repeat that formula against the Royals?
Yeah, I do. I was listening to Rates and Barrels today, and they were talking about how he had the best strikeout percentage of the season in September, 27-point-something%. He's getting, I think they said 3 extra inches of depth on his cutter. And we saw against the Yankees in 5 innings, he had 9 strikeouts. against them all on the cutter. So clearly that little bit of extra movement is just enough to get the swing and miss on it. And again, the sweeper is more of a swing and miss pitch. So yeah, I would expect him to be his most strikeoutiest of the year coming into the playoffs. I don't know if he didn't use the sweeper until late in the season because he was worried about injury and preserving himself for free agency, or if it was like, if I don't give them a look at it until later on, it's going to be harder to game plan against. I don't know, but I think it's good timing for the team and for him as he enters free agency and we enter a playoff push here, hoping to get to the World Series.
We don't have the probable starters for the Orioles, as I mentioned earlier, but beyond game one. But it seems to line up that Zach Eflin would get the ball in game two, and he would be going up against Seth Lugo, who had a really good season for the Royals. And then game three, Michael Wacha, pretty reliable veteran for Kansas City, would get the ball. Again, we don't know who's going to get to start for the Orioles, but it does seem to be lining up that it would be Dean Kramer. We had a long discussion last week about whether or not you would rather have Kramer or Albert Suarez start the third game of the series. And although we can't officially rule it out yet, Suarez did start Sunday's finale against the Twins. So that would seem to make him less likely to be starting game three. And in fact, it makes it possible, depending on his usage, that the Orioles don't even put him on the wild card roster. So how do you feel about those possible pitching matchups beyond game one?
Yeah, I don't think Suarez will be on the wild card roster. I think they set him up to either start game one or two of the ALDS in the event that we get there. I honestly think if we win game one, Dean Kramer is going to pitch game two, because then if we win game two with Kramer, you can start Zach Eflin at game one at Yankee Stadium on Saturday. Maybe you use a Kramer-Povich tandem to kind of work your way through that game two lineup. And then if you need him in game three, you can go to Eflin. But, I mean, you could also just shut him down back-to-back with Burns and Eflin as well. But, yeah, Kramer, I think he's pitched really well the second half. I think this is one of the better seasons of his career altogether. And the reason I think it might make sense to start him against the Royals in game two or game three if needed is I just don't trust him at Yankee Stadium as much as I would trust Zach Eflin at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is worth pointing out this year when it comes to the Orioles starting rotation is the postseason experience. Last year, the Orioles, had to roll out 3 consecutive starters who had no postseason experience in Kyle Braddis, Grayson Rodriguez, and Dean Kramer. This year, they're in a much different spot because they're going to have Corbin Burns in game one. Kramer had that rough game last year against the Rangers, but he's able to put that behind him now. And Eflin has a lot of postseason experience and has actually been quite effective in the playoffs. So how much of an edge do you think that gives the Orioles?
I would think it gives us a pretty decent edge. Yeah, what do you think?
Expressing your love can look many different ways. And with the right jewelry gift from Blue Nile, it can truly sparkle. Blue Nile's collection of classic diamond jewelry makes for the kind of gift that speaks volumes without saying a single word. Or switch things up with a sapphire piece sure to spark conversation. Either way, Blue Nile's Diamond Guarantee ensures you get the highest quality at the best price. Express yourself with Blue Nile and get up to 30% off at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
Well, it puts you in a better spot puts the Orioles in a better spot than they were in last year when they were really having to rely on a lot of younger players to get through. Eflin in particular, I think, is going to be an X factor in this series because even in a scenario where you mentioned that the Orioles perhaps hold him back if they win game one, you may have to turn to him for game three if you get there, or you're going to be looking at him starting game one of the Yankees series. But there's also the possibility you just decide, you know what, you win game one, go for your best option in game two, finish the series off, and you worry about game one of the Yankees series when you get there. Because outside of one outing last year where it was a little rough against the Rangers, Eflin's postseason numbers are pretty solid. So I think you have to have some confidence in him going out there and being successful. And Burns, again, a little bit of a smaller sample size, and there is one bad start in there, which was last year, but he's been pretty effective in the playoffs.
Yeah, and like you said, last year it was Bradish, Rodriguez, and Kramer, all who had, within their first year or two of the league, or Kramer a little bit more, but no postseason experience. Yeah, at least even if you do go Kramer, he at least had that one outing. It wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but at least he knows what it feels like to be out there in a playoff atmosphere. You'd like to think that he'll be better off for it. Eflin and Burns have been out there as well. They're veterans. Yeah, I do think that it lines up better. Maybe this year we'd rather have maybe Bradish, Rodriguez available to us, but for what we have, yeah, I think the veteranosity, if that's a word, will certainly help. And if you can get away with Burns, Kramer sweep of the Royals, then you have Eflin game 1 Saturday, Burns again game 2 Monday. I like that extra day off for the Orioles if we get there. I'm going to knock on wood every time I talk about the future. Then you can go, I think we're off Tuesday again. You could do Kramer, back to Eflin, back to Burns. So the way the schedule lines up, you really only need 3 starters at the most for the ALDS, and you could get away with 3 Burns starts within the first 2 series. You have to like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And focusing on this matchup against the Royals, I just want to run through possible scenarios with you. And I'll start with the negative one if you're an Orioles fan. If the Royals are going to win this series, how would it happen?
Offense disappears again for the Orioles, and you see them struggling to scrape runs together and runners in scoring position. They're not hitting the long ball, they're not hitting the home runs, and they can't get the timely hits when they need them, whether it's bad luck or just not what they're designed to do. Either way, and the Royals just do enough to scrape by, maybe late in games against the bullpen, or they get a couple runs early, and like we saw sometimes in the second half, the Orioles just could not erase the early deficit. So yeah, that's the thing. If tomorrow it's 4:30 and the Royals are up 2-0 in the third inning, maybe I'm starting to worry a little bit.
Yeah, the one thing that does concern me about this matchup is that with the top 2 pitchers in particular from Kansas City side, Reagans and Lugo, you have 2 guys that could shut down this lineup, especially if this is a lineup that we saw for most of September until players started to come off the IL. I think that that's really going to be the key thing, is how they hit and runners in scoring position. I talked about the importance of Gunnar Henderson earlier, but there's a lot of guys that I think are going to have to step up and have good series. Anthony Santander, Colton Cowser, you go a little bit further down the lineup. If you could get the Cedric Mullins we saw for most of September in this playoff series, that's going to help tremendously. So it's really going to have to come down to how they hit with runners in scoring position, because that seemed to get away from them down the stretch this year, and it got away from them in the playoffs last year. So I think that that's going to be key, and I think that the other thing is going to really ride on what Corbin Burns does in game 1. If he is at the top of his game and he goes deep into this one for you, you might not need more than 3 or 4 runs to win it. And you're going to have a well-rested bullpen going into game 2, so that no matter what you decide to do, you have some flexibility there. But if the Royals get to Burns early in game 1, that's going to be a pretty bad sign for me. Yeah,
absolutely. And if for some chance the Royals win game 1, how are you feeling? Down 1-0, you think you're still feeling pretty comfortable the Orioles win the next 2, or do you start to be like, are we ever going to win a playoff game again?
I'm starting to panic a little bit, and I'll be honest with you, the playoff loss streak is not really on my mind. I'm more concerned about winning the series. Yeah, if they lose, 2 of 3 games in this series, or they lose back to back, what does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? So I'm not that concerned about that, but I won't feel as confident if they lose game 1, because you're going to have a team that has been really shaky over the last couple of months that you're relying on to come back and win back-to-back games against a team with a pretty good pitching staff. And I'll turn this on its head now. If the Orioles are going to win, how's that going to look?
Early leads, they are hitting home runs, whether it's against the starters, because these are really good pitchers like we've talked about a lot, whether it's late in games when the bullpen comes in. If you can lift the ball, pull the ball and hit it hard. I think I saw a stat today that was like when the Orioles hit the ball hard, they win games. When they don't hit the ball as hard, they lose games, which it's as simple as that. You're going to just have to come out there, hit the ball hard. What I want to see tomorrow is, like I was saying earlier, just work Reagan's foul off pitches, get deep into counts. And look, if a fastball's right down the middle, obviously you want to swing at it, hit it hard early in the count. But I'd love to see him out in like the fourth, fifth, even early in the sixth inning. Then I feel really good about our chances to score late in the game. But it's going to be just hitting the ball hard, early leads, and Burns and Eflin / Kramer do their thing and hold a poor hitting team scoreless or close to it for the first half, 2/3 of each game.
Exactly. I think it really is going to come down to the offense, because if they can put up runs early and take the pressure off these pitchers, that's going to help a lot, because Salvador Perez and Bobby Witt Jr. aside, I don't think you really worry about a lot of home run threats on the Royals. Vinny Pasquantino could be a real X factor there that we're not taking into consideration, but they're the guys that you don't want up with runners on base because they could hit the ball out of the ballpark. Most of that lineup, though, I think what you have to be worried about is just keeping them off base. So the ability for the Orioles to cash in when they have runners in scoring position and get on the board early, I do think is going to be really key in this series. And I'll go with one last thing before we get into our prediction, which is we've kind of touched on this, but who's the one player that you think might surprise us in a positive way this series?
I'll say from a pitching standpoint, Gregory Soto. I think he's going to be huge this postseason if we're going to be good. He has been excellent. I wish I had the numbers in front of me. Overall, since he came to the Orioles, he's got a 5.09 ERA, but I believe he gave up like 9 runs in the first 2 or 3 outings that he had, and since then he's just been lights out. Great velocity, gets ground balls, strikes batters out. I think from a pitching standpoint, Gregory Soto is going to have a huge playoffs if the Orioles are going to do well. And on the offense, I'll say Colton Cowser. I know playoff results aren't going to dictate any Rookie of the Year voters or anything like that, but he ended the year strong. He was hitting for power late in the season, and I think he's going to have a nice, confident series and playoffs overall to build upon his rookie year going into 2025.
On offense, I'm going to go with Ryan Mountcastle. He looked decent coming off the IL, and this first game could be a matchup that's pretty favorable to him. With Reagan's on the mound, he's probably going to get the start on Tuesday. And we talked earlier about the need for some guys towards the bottom of the order to step up. I think Mountcastle could be that guy. Runner on second, 1 out. That's someone I would feel comfortable having at the plate, especially with a left-hander on the mound. So I would not rule out Ryan Mountcastle having a big series. And then on the pitching side, I think Jacob Webb is really going to be key, because one of the things that I think made Webb such a trusted arm out of the bullpen this year is that he can give you a little bit of length. He can go more than 3 outs. And he's also a guy who does well against lefties. And I think that that's really going to be key. If you could get him out there for more than a couple of batters, knowing that he can have roughly equal, if not a little bit better success against left-handed batters than he does against righties, that makes him really valuable, because you're not having to switch pitchers in and out as much. So I think Webb is going to be the guy that the Orioles turn to in some high leverage spots that hopefully can get the job done. And then on offense, I think Mountcastle could be the surprise.
Good choices. I can see that as well.
And with that, how does this series unfold?
I've been wavering whether I do think the Orioles will win. I just been wavering whether I think it'll be 2 or 3 games. I was leaning towards 3 games. coming into the episode, but I think I've talked myself into Burns and Kramer getting it done in 2. I think the offense is going to show up. So give me Orioles in 2 days of rest, and we go into the Yankees.
I'll take the Orioles in 3. I could waver back and forth either way, but I think that Kansas City played them tough during the regular season. They're a team that can hang in the ball games. So I think they get at least one win out of this, but I think the Orioles take the series. And with that, we will be back later this week. Date and time to be determined. It will most likely be Thursday night, but we will have more for you on our socials, of which there are many, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, and TikTok. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up and join our community today. I should mention also that we are 2 weeks away from our live show at Checker Spot Brewing. We are very much looking forward to that. That will be Monday, October 14th at 6 p.m. And this will either be a recap of the season or hopefully a on discussion of what is going on in the playoffs. Connor Newcomb, the co-host or the host of Locked On Orioles, is expected to join us, and we will have more guests announced between now and then. Check for announcements on social media as well as on the show. Checker Spot Brewing, by the way, 1421 Ridgely Street in Baltimore, not far from Camden Yards. So if you're heading to a postseason game this week, be sure to stop by there and plan on coming back on October 14th for our live show. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.
Bingo.
All right, Phil, we're recording now, so it's live. Go ahead. Pick on me the way that you want to.
Did I say that? I wouldn't say that to my son. Man, I mean, come on, man.
Just go. This isn't CBS.
All right, be quiet for a few seconds. Why would people want to listen to the Sims Complete podcast? Well, a couple things. One, if you like to see sons pick on their father, this might be the place. If you want to see a place where the father just kicks the out of his son, this would be the place. What do you like about it, Matt?
Ditto. Father-son dynamic duo talking about the game of football that we love and share and appreciate together. And, you know, hey, it's an extension of what we did, right? Growing up, I was able to watch my father play football, then obviously watch him as a broadcaster. And then he taught me the game of football and share the wisdom that he learned throughout his playing career. And, you know, hey, sometimes we're full of it and sometimes we actually know a thing or two.
Well, we do a lot of research. At least I do. You're a little spotty, but you know, you hang in there.
Yeah.
It's fun. I love doing this and it's been awesome.
Sims Complete. Check us out wherever your podcasts are available on the Believe Network. Appreciate it. See ya.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.